Yeah, so let's talk about Destiny. So I'm Justin Truman. I'm the general manager for Destiny 2. I've got about 20 years of game dev experience on consoles and PC, and the last 12 years I've been working on Destiny at Bungie. And on Destiny, I've worked on a bunch of different roles, engineering, design, production, business now. And so my goal in this talk is to talk about Bungie's evolution as a studio in a really cross-discipline way. It's also worth saying, while I'm the only one up here speaking right now, every learning that we're going to cover today was the collective contribution of a ton of really talented and insightful folks at Bungie. So the only part that I'll take sole credit for is any mistakes or dumb statements that I'm about to make. And the evolution that I want to talk about for the next hour is our journey from our box product roots as a company to the live service team that we have today. And this journey really catalyzed in some kind of painful ways with the launch of Destiny 2. So way back in 2017, we launched Destiny 2. And at the time, Destiny 1 was still a thriving live service. But we had committed with our publisher to release a full sequel to that live service that we had just started nurturing 3 years prior. And so for us at Bungie, we knew that if we were going to have to sequel, we wanted to do it right. We wanted to make something that we and the entire Destiny community were excited about. Because we liked a lot about the original Destiny 1, but we knew that it had a reputation as a somewhat flawed game. It was really fun, but it was also pretty nerdy and hardcore. And so we wanted to turn that on its head and make a much more widely appealing version of Destiny. So we built a better campaign with a much better narrative. We tuned the rewards to be faster and more generous with more instant gratification. Our primary razor during development was that we wanted to put a 2 on the box. You can see how it kind of subtly influenced our marketing treatment leading up to launch. And we did it. We launched to great reviews. Destiny 2's Metacritic was more than 10 points above its predecessor. And our players and our fans told us that we had made something more appealing, more polished, and more rewarding. And that was also reflected by our in-game data, because Destiny 2's player engagement was both broader with more players and deeper with more hours than it had ever been in Destiny 1. For about 6 weeks. And then issues started to emerge, with the first signs being our most avid, hardcore community running out of content. This then rapidly spread to broader, more casual players, and eventually these problems spilled all the way out of our community and started creating a bad reputation for our brand in a major way, even amongst gamers who didn't play Destiny. And that threatened the total ecosystem of the game as we first frustrated and then shed our player base. To show this visually, so this was our weekly active users for Destiny 2 in the first few months. And for comparison, this is what Destiny 1 looked like. So far, so good. But then this started happening. And this moment right here in February of 2018 was fucking terrifying. So this graph shows the trend of our weekly active users. And at the rate that we were shedding players, we did the math. I remember being in the meeting, we did the math. And if this continued for just 5 more weeks, we would run out of players. The entire population would be gone. And we were seriously looking at potentially being 1 month away from having to just close up shop on Destiny 2 altogether. So that was in February of 2018. Now fast forward 4 years, and we're on track in 2022 to have our most successful year ever in the history of the Destiny franchise. We've hit our highest critical and community reception in the history of our series, and we're on track to have the strongest business year we've ever had. And that's 5 years after launching Destiny 2. That's 8 years after the launch of the franchise. And that runs like totally counter to the AAA peak and decay model that I've experienced with every other game I've worked on in my career. So what I want to talk about for the rest of this talk is what had to change about Bungie to go from here to here. And this moment, when we were literally 5 weeks away from shuttering Destiny 2 as a product, it was like exciting, it was intense, it was terrifying, and I'm going to talk about it some today. But more than any one moment, I want to talk about the long, multi-year process that this moment catalyzed, that required us to rethink so many of our development practices and our studio culture from the ground up over multiple years. And at its core, this is about the transition from a box product mindset of developing games to a live service mindset. And so what do I mean when I say a service mindset? And I'm not talking about like the product definition here. Like I think we all know what a live service game looks like on the product side. But what is the mentality, the culture, the practices that let you win in this environment? And so for the rest of this hour, I want to try to define what we had to learn to get to where we are today. And each of these transitions that I'm going to be talking about, they were really hard for us to first identify and recognize. And then even once we understood them, they were still hard to navigate and transform to as an organization. And so I think that they're each pretty universal in application. So I'm hoping that we can help anyone in the audience who's undergoing similar transformations on your team, at least to get past that first step of identifying and recognizing these, and then the actual transformation is still pretty tough. But actually, I want to go back a step earlier, because before we can define the endpoint of what a service mindset is, we have to define the starting point. So what do we mean at Bungie when we say the box product mindset for developing games? And I would say for us at Bungie, like Halo was our canonical example of a AAA box product. Because when we built Halo, we found success on every axis. We had critical acclaim, we had broad popular appeal, cultural relevance, high sales, sustained player engagement. Halo was a winner by every possible definition of success. But unfortunately, that meant that we didn't have to think too deeply about which of those successes really mattered. By contrast, Destiny 1 was the first game that Bungie made in well over a decade that didn't receive universal critical acclaim. And this was like a really big blow to our studio culture at the time, because in many ways it felt like failure. And what we didn't realize when we launched Destiny 1 was that Destiny was already becoming a success in the ways that mattered. Engagement was the true measure of success for a franchise like ours, but we didn't know it yet. And a lot of our efforts to make a better Destiny 2 were because we had a wrong internal definition of what success was. Because you can fix your review scores, you can fix your sentiment, you can even fix your sales as long as you have engagement. As long as you have a community of players who care about and are passionate about your game. Even when that passion is being expressed as like anger or frustration. Anger, we eventually learn, like anger is not the opposite of loving a game. Anger is like 2 degrees off from loving a game, and they both come from passion, from people who are highly engaged with what you're making. And the opposite of loving a game, the thing that could kill you, is apathy. And that's so much more scary than anger. But I'm getting distracted. So from way back in the Halo days, all the way through Destiny 2 launch, our process was pretty straightforward. We would hire the best talent in the industry. We would give them a lot of freedom to use their creative guts and their creative process to make whatever they considered to be the best game possible. We'd release that product with a big bang and the largest marketing push we could manage, and we'd trust that success by every definition would follow from that. And this was all summed up at the time by our studio motto: we make games we want to play. And this is at the wall in front of our studio. And we believed that when you trust your gut on making something awesome, making something that you can't wait to play, that all of the different forms of success that you might want, critical acclaim, sales, engaged players, those all just flow naturally and intuitively from that. And this picture is old and grainy because it's an old picture I actually found on my cell phone, because we took down that motto a little while after D2 launch as we evolved our view of what success really meant. And our new studio motto, this is a more recent picture, is we create worlds that inspire friendship. And this new studio purpose has a bunch of benefits over the old one, like including the fact that we make games we want to play. It sounds a little too much like it's just like gatekeeping for bald middle-aged white guys like me. But besides adopting a more global and inclusive view, this is really about a shift away from that box product mindset into the service mindset. And again, I'm not talking about the product design. I'm not talking about business models or like free-to-play or microtransactions. I'm talking about something much more fundamental to how we think about success. Like if you think about the best AAA box product games out there, like The Last of Us's, the Tsushimas, the Elden Rings, there's plenty more that I could throw up on here. Horizon, like core to the box product mindset in these games is the goal of exceeding your expectations in every way across every axis. They blow your mind with their scale, with their polish, with their quality. At their best, they often almost feel like perfect games. But we all know that these products don't start perfect. Like one of my favorite old quotes from a Pixar interview that I love is, all of our movies suck at first. Which, like, it sounds weird, it's almost incomprehensible when as consumers, all we get to see is this near perfect run of artistic products coming out of Pixar and now Disney. But we're all familiar with what the creative process is actually like behind the scenes, that nothing starts great, nothing starts perfect. Making anything great is always about iterating through failure after failure, making it just a little bit better each time until you finally have something incredible. And this idea of taking a game, taking any creative idea, and doing all of that iteration in secret at your studio, so that the only thing you release, the only thing your audience sees is near perfect, that is what we're talking about at Bungie when we say the box product mindset. Because you iterate and iterate, guided mostly by your talent and your gut until you have something amazing. Then you release it with this giant marketing explosion and hope that it blows all of the doors off. And to be clear, like, I'm not knocking this process. It's amazing. I have tons of respect for every one of these studios, every one of these games. Like this idea of seeming like you never miss is why I originally applied to work at Bungie. And so I'm not trying to criticize it, I'm just setting it up to contrast it with a different approach that we've now had to adopt for Destiny. So if that's the boxed product approach, then what is the service approach and mindset by contrast? And more than anything else, being a service is about being fast. For a live service, more than anything, more important even than quality, a live service is about being fast. Like back in 2010, you could have a long-lasting, high-retention game just by releasing something that was super high quality, really well-balanced, and unchanged that players kept coming back to for years. But to stay afloat as a service today, you need to be constantly feeding your players. You need to be responding to their concerns. You need to be making the game better. And so if box products are in the business of over-delivery, live service is the business of constant delivery. And to provide that constant delivery to players, you need to be fast. You need to be as fast as your organization can possibly be. And so at Bungie, one of the key lessons that we codified here to shift our mindset is that velocity is more important than position. Like your position is your game's quality right now. How good is it? What issues does it have? How much content does it have to engage your players? And these are all important questions, but so much more important for us now is how fast can you change that position? If your players need more content, how fast can you funnel it into your game? If your game has an unbalanced meta, how long does it stay unbalanced? And if your community has a valid complaint, how quickly can you respond to that complaint? And this is why in this important but unintuitive way, I'd rather have fast than perfect. Because being perfect, even just being great, is your current position. But fast is your velocity. And a fast game will become great. But a great, slow game will very quickly fall behind. So let's tease apart a tangible example for us at Bungie. This shift in our mindset to focus on velocity has meant that for our future games that we're building, we mentally shift a lot of our focus away from the launch of the product. Because all of our industry experience and training, all that box product training has us traditionally laser focused from day one on having the best possible game on the day it launches. That's what you're losing sleep over, is what's gonna happen when we finally get to launch day. But if you're trying to make a live service, we found you should actually kind of de-emphasize that launch in your mind. A much more important question is, what is your roadmap and release tools gonna look like for the first year after your game launches? Because you can launch with a game that blows people's minds and is super high polish. Or you can launch with a game that has lots of promise, but a bunch of janky issues on day one. And the sifter that's gonna determine which of those two games is relevant 12, 24 months later is their velocity. How many updates came out? How much better was the game getting each month? Because that is what builds and retains fans in 2022. And if you're optimizing for that, then the position that you're in on the day you release becomes less and less relevant, because it's just one beat among many on your way towards a perfect game. And the reality is, if you try to launch a new live service game in the 2020s, it's kind of like that Pixar quote, a simple fact is your game is probably gonna suck at launch. And that's okay. Launch is not the end of your journey. Launch is the beginning. No new game iterated on in secret for however many years can show up and immediately beat the existing live services that have had the advantage of being able to iterate directly with their community for 5 or 10 years. You don't get to win that battle on day one. But if you're focused on your velocity, not your position at launch, then the better challenge becomes, how fast can you improve your game once you are in that same direct dialogue with your community? How quickly can you change your existing roadmap if you find something in the live game? Can you deploy weekly patches, daily patches? If you have a major exploit in your game, can you identify the issue, then triage it, test it, and deploy a hotfix in 24 hours? Because if you're focused on those kinds of challenges, building up that velocity before you launch, instead of just focusing on your position at launch, then your game will get to perfect with shocking speed. And you'll be making a game that is perfectly tailored to your community and built to last. So a bunch of this, the big cultural hurdle for our team and our organization, one of the main themes that I'm gonna keep returning to is about redefining success. What does quality mean to you and to your team? And I don't just mean in terms of business goals or KPIs or something. I mean in your bones, in your heart. Why do you get up and go to work making video games every day? And for us at Bungie, for a lot of us, it used to mean that feeling of seeming perfect, of being impeccable, being uncriticizable. That is all part of that box product mindset. But now we're instead focused on being fast. And the really tough part here, though, is that to do that, you have to get comfortable with public failure. Like, you have to get comfortable with all those failures and those iterations, that journey from your game sucking to it being great. More of that happening out in the open instead of in secret at your studio. And this trade-off is worth making. Like, it gives you speed. It lets you feedback and iterate and get better faster. It makes the final product even better. But you have to be willing to take those lumps, which are a lot. If your ego, like ours, if your definition of success as an artist is tied up in that mystique of only letting your failure happen in secret. To give one more example in this space, like broader than just developing a game, like I believe this shift to an ongoing service-oriented iterative conversation is happening in every sector. Like, even with people's personal brands. This is why you're seeing so many more like public apologies from corporations, from celebrities, whomever. It's more and more of that failure, just like we had on Destiny, happening out in the open. And in success, it means by embracing this service mindset, you're getting to a better position even faster through that feedback, through that critique, and that extra transparency. That's honestly, like, I think not optional anymore to any highly visible brand. All right, so that was our first big learning, that velocity is more important than position. For the next part, I want to dive in deeper into what it means to really redefine success. Like I was saying about the Halo days, when you're really successful, it's really easy to not bother with a precise definition here. And I'd wager that for most people in this room, you probably define success as some combination of two things. Whatever your chosen version of quality is, like that could be Steam user reviews or Game of the Year awards or Metacritic. I don't know, do people still use Metacritic? I'm old. But whatever that definition of quality is, mixed with some definition of reach. Like that could be financial success, it could be unit sales, or it could just be how like culturally impactful or big your game is with your chosen audience. But in order to adopt a service mindset, we've had to get a lot better at defining multiple axes of success and doing that very precisely. So let me start with our first tangible example. This was when we really started learning to break apart and be more precise with our definitions. So remember this terrifying moment I was talking about in February of 2018. At the time, living through it felt like a stressful, real-life version of FTL, if you've ever played that game. Like, if your engine room is on fire and your O2 is draining out through a hull breach and your shields are down, which of those is most important to fix first? Because if you get it wrong, your ship's gonna explode. And the mantra that we came up with during that difficult year was first trust, then retention, then revenue. And we realized that our first priority was player trust. Because we'd assumed when we built Destiny 2 that players who ran out of content would just happily leave and come back for the next expansion. But what they were actually doing once they ran out was they were sticking around in all of our online communities with these megaphones shouting to everyone to avoid this game because it sucked. And this was especially bad with streamers and influencers because we had literally hurt their livelihood by making streaming Destiny a less viable profession. So they were loudly and like understandably shouting their complaints to every viewer. And so we knew that we needed to solve these trust issues first. So we focused a lot of our early work on trying to repair our reputation with our players and our community and our influencers. We bumped to the top of our priority queue several early changes to the game, not because our designers believed that these were the most important root causes to our engagement issues, but because they were vocal pain points in the community, and addressing them quickly would clearly indicate that we were listening and we were responding to our player community, and we were just trying to do our best. And this trust battle took us almost a full year, if I'm being honest. And that's also when we did stuff like we removed all of the microtransactions from some of our releases in that year, taking multi-million-dollar losses in the process because the risk of losing more trust was so much worse at the time than the known loss in revenue. And the reason that we were able to eat that revenue loss was because we knew that revenue wasn't the goal yet. Trust was. Revenue can come later. And then once we had player trust and sentiment under control, we then focused on retention. And this was the real focus of our first major expansion after Destiny 2 launched, Forsaken. Forsaken's product focus, more than any other specific goal for that release, was to fix the end game for Destiny 2, to fix our retention, and to ensure that there were plenty of long-term pursuits and content in Destiny 2 for our most hardcore players. And this focus allowed the product to succeed. Not just succeed in being a great expansion, which it was, but being the expansion that Destiny 2 needed at that moment in time as a service. And it worked. So this was that terrifying moment in February of 2018. But by the time Forsaken launched, 1 year in, our brand trust was back on track. Our retention had recovered from that precipitous drop after D2 launch. And only after we had solved for trust and solved for retention did we then actually start paying attention to the business again. That was when we started experimenting with revenue innovation that we knew would ultimately be player wins, but were complex, and we knew that they needed to be built off of a foundation of trust. So that was when we started charting our course to get out of loot boxes, or and move our store to direct purchase. That's also when we started to add a free-to-play entry point into our game. Like, these were all designed to further sustain the long-term Destiny hobby, and I think they've made our game better for all players. But to go back to that FTL analogy, like, it would be suicide to be messing with our shields when our O2 systems were down. And I truly believe that each of these different releases along this road would not have succeeded if we didn't have clear, laser focus each time on what our specific goals and definition of success were. And importantly, these goals, they change from release to release. So that was a really simple example. 3 definitions of success, layering them on one at a time. As we've iterated since then, it gets more and more nuanced because we keep trying to build more and more precise definitions of success. So for a more recent example, here's one of our typical KPI report cards. I pulled this straight from one of our internal presentations not too long ago. KPI means key performance indicator. It's quantifiable measurements of performance that we measure against a defined target we set ahead of time. And we call it a report card because while every release might have their own unique metrics that we want to measure, so like, for example, in the Witch Queen, we released the new glaive weapon. So we have a metric for like how many people are using the glaive weapon. Those are unique per release. This report card is the baseline grades that every release is going to get no matter what. And it gives us a common language to define and discuss success every time. So let me talk through what our KPI report card looks like and what each of these different measurements mean to us. So first up, we have that trust in Bungie, trust in our game, and we measure it in 2 ways. One is vocal sentiment. So what are people saying about us online, on social media, on Twitch? And vocal sentiment is super important because that's your reputation, right? Like that is what people say you are. But it's also often distorted by a small vocal minority. There's a few people who talk a lot and a lot of people who have an opinion and don't talk very much. So to get beyond that vocal minority, we also do our own weekly surveys of player happiness using a rate last week metric. So we randomly reach out to, I think, a few thousand folks every week, and we ask them to rate the last week of Destiny on a 1 to 5 point scale. And we've tried some different systems here, like we've done more subjective measurements of quality, we've done net promoter scores, but we found that rate last week hits that sweet spot for us of rapid, precise data that we can quantify about player happiness. If you release an amazing live event, you can know the very next week if your players are happy about it. Or if you do something terrible and you break something, you can know immediately if your players are unhappy about it. And so between the two of these, you can get a good week over week trending of both what players think of your game and what they're saying they think of your game. And both of those are interesting and different data points about player trust. So next up, we have the lifeblood of our game, our engagement. And our primary metric for this is our average DAU, so average daily active users. How big is our community that is willing to show up and play each day? And you can measure your active users daily, weekly, or monthly. There's interesting nuance there and different learnings that you can pull from each of those different types of measurements. But for our report cards, we like DAU because it's not very latent. You can get new DAU scores every single day. And while DAU is ultimately one of the best indicators of health for us as a franchise, it's kind of like our blood pressure. Like it's super important, but it's not very actionable on its own. To try to impact DAU, we have to go one layer deeper. So DAU is ultimately a function of really just how many players are coming into your game each week and how many players are leaving it. Your funnel in, funnel out. And so we measure this through new players, so brand new accounts that are created on a given week, our weekly return rate. So these are players that played last week and have returned this week to play again. And then win back. So these are players who did not play last week, but played at some point in the past. It could have been 2 weeks ago, it could have been 5 years ago. But for whatever lapse, they've returned to us. And you put these factors together, and then you can see pretty easily your funnel in and funnel out of players. And importantly, each of these KPIs are gonna be pushed differently. Like the type of content that typically causes your engaged players to stick around, that raises your return rate, is gonna be really different from the type of content that's gonna cause new players to show up. And this is where getting higher granularity in how you're defining success for a given feature, a piece of content, or a release gets really important. So finally, beyond our blood pressure, we've got the revenue that we're trying to accomplish, made up both in unit sales and in microtransactions. And importantly here, like while we're tracking revenue daily with these report cards, we aren't actually optimizing for revenue. Because like it would be easy to make decisions that temporarily spiked our revenue, but were very bad for the long-term health of our game. And that's why we focus a lot more on our trust and our retention scores than just on our revenue scores. All right, so we're gathering this data, we're bundling it up in these report cards, but the data only matters if you're doing something with it. And so the remaining step for us is about validating our hypotheses and really unpacking and learning from this data each release. So we have 3 main ways that we use this data that each have different levels of latency. They range from very rapid and timely use of the data to very thoroughly analyzed but delayed. So the lowest latency access is all these KPIs have dashboards that are live updated and they're visible to our whole studio every day. We have them up in the kitchens, in our offices, and if you're remote, you can log in and you can see them directly in your browser. And this was like a meaningful cultural shift because we're talking about live updating and displaying all of our core metrics, including our business metrics about stuff like revenue, to the whole team. But what this means is that at a glance, anyone in our studio who's trying to make a decision about something they're building can see how we're trending against our KPIs for the year, for the week, or for the given release. And that data is updated every single day. We then do what we call live ops reviews of this data every 2 weeks. So we dissect the performance of the last 2 weeks of our game with the team. And importantly, the audience here for these live ops reviews is not just like our PMs or analytics. We try to get all of our feature leads, like all of our design directors, our art leads, anyone who's making creative decisions about the product to prioritize attending these meetings every 2 weeks. Because in these meetings, besides going over our report cards, we do deep dives into specific timely topics in the game. So like as a recent example, we just launched the Witch Queen, what has it been, like a month? About a month ago. And we launched our first legendary campaign with the Witch Queen. So this was a hard mode that you could opt into and play instead of the normal mode. And so 2 weeks after that launch, in our live ops review, we did a deep dive on how that legendary mode feature performed and how many players engaged with it, how many of them completed it. We could have that conversation with the whole team just a couple weeks after launch. And what this means is that we can try different creative experiments like that and validate them 3-4 times across different releases. And our creatives then get to develop a much more intuitive understanding of what kinds of creative approaches are going to yield the results that they want. And finally, we have these large 2-hour lecture-style recaps that we do at the end of every season, where we recap the all-up performance of every aspect of a season or an expansion release several months after it's gone live. And this is where we get the most in-depth analysis, but it's also where we have the most latency, because we spend several months building these presentations and consolidating our analysis. But we then present these in our theater, and we record them and put them all up on our streaming portal for any employee to watch. So this picture was from one of our pre-COVID sessions. That's why we're not wearing masks. But they're basically our college-level courses on learning the Destiny business. And they've become a great entry point for any employee to start understanding how their work is going to impact our players at scale. And so what this all drives to, what we're trying to accomplish with this nuanced definition of success, is to start doing data-informed design. And importantly, like, it's not data-driven. We are not putting any guardrails on our creative process or our team's vision. We regularly try radical new experiments that veer far away from our existing data, that veer away from our standard formula. Like a recent example, in last December, we released a 30th anniversary pack. And that was a very different product from anything we had built in the last several years that was driven, the definition of that product was driven by the creative passion of the team and how they wanted to celebrate 30 years of Bungie, more really than anything else. But even when we take those big swings, when we're guided by that creative vision, those creators then get to be scientists. What we do is we try something new, but ahead of time, we predict what we think is going to happen. We then take those predictions and quantify them. And then finally, after we release, we validate whether those results matched our predictions. And almost every release through this process, we get at least one just like shocking and surprising result back that totally violates our expectations and our hypotheses of our game. And I love when this happens, because that's when I know that we're really learning. Like, that's when I know that we're honing our craft. We're discovering something that's true about Destiny, or or something that's true about our community that didn't fit any of our shared conventional wisdom up until that moment. And as a result, we're becoming better designers, becoming better artists and creators. Okay, so we've talked about velocity, we've talked about data. The third major way that I want to talk about redefining success is in the product itself. And the way we talk about this mindset shift internally is you're building a train station, not a train. So if you think about that box product mindset as building the most impressive, fast, luxurious new train that the world has ever seen, you're poring over the details of the trim in every cabin, the friction on the wheels, everything to make that train the most amazing thing the world has ever seen. And you probably have some sort of like intense push at the end of the project. It could be a targeted crunch, or it could just be like extra focus where all anyone is thinking about is how to get those last few steps to release to a gold master, to a final, perfectly polished experience. But as a live service, what we're actually building is a train station. And the moment that that train has departed, you have another one arriving. And in fact, the track probably needs to be cleared for that next train before the previous one has even departed. So this, to put it visually, this was what our release schedule looked like, and development schedule, during Destiny 1 and Destiny 2 development. So we released Destiny 1, we built a couple expansions, one after another for Destiny 1, and then in parallel, we were building Destiny 2 and eventually released that. But otherwise, it's a fairly straight shot. We were building trains in this model. But this is what our release schedule looks like today. And so at any given moment, we have 5 to 6 releases in various stages of development. And we're not a significantly larger team than we were when we were shipping Destiny 2. Like, this hasn't been a dramatic scale up in team size, but it has been a dramatic scale up in schedule complexity, year over year, with largely the same team. And what comes with that increased complexity is yet another redefinition of what success looks like. Because success for a great train station means predictability. It means scheduling rigor. It means no one should be doing any heroics. Like, there's this great, I don't know, maybe it's apocryphal Miyamoto quote that a delayed game is eventually good, but a bad game is bad forever. But we found that once you're in a train station mindset, you actually need to have almost the completely opposite approach. Because a delayed train doesn't just hurt that train. It potentially causes cascade failure and chaos in the entire station. Whereas the reality is today, a bad game can be fixed. And like, I hope y'all are hearing the point that I'm trying to make here. Like, I'm not trying to dunk on Miyamoto. I'm not trying to say that quality isn't important. But like that earlier point about velocity, it's that you don't get the quality on a service through perfectionism or through heroics and overextending yourself in any one given moment. That is train thinking. It's not station thinking. Instead, you get to quality one train at a time. Like, our seasons in Destiny right now are the best they've ever been. I think that's a safe statement that our community would agree with. So are our expansions right now, the best they've ever been. And the reality is our seasons got there a fair bit quicker than our expansions did, despite our seasons being under tighter schedule constraints with less room to like iterate and polish. And so do you know why they got there faster? Because right now we're on season 16. We've been able to iterate so many times as train after train passes through that station to get to where we are today. But that also means that to keep the station running, you need to let trains go out the door that carry risk on them that you might not be comfortable with, or that have things that you know could be just like a little bit better if you just backed up the train station just for a couple weeks and did a heroic savings throw. And we've had to learn painfully not to do that, because that only makes things worse. So a tangible example that we found here is with crunch. Because now a truism that we have at Bungie is that on a live service, you're either never crunching or you're always crunching. Because if you put in that crunch level effort, even when it's just individuals choosing it for themselves from their own passion, you overextend yourself. You burn down your stamina bar. But unlike those big box products that we used to build, where you could roll from that release with a low stamina bar into some early pre-production and concept phase where you get to recharge, in a train station, you are rolling from that release straight into another high-pressure release in the middle of production. You don't get a chance to recover from any overextensions. If you spent an extra week closing that last release, you've just lost a week on your next release, and you're already behind. And so in basically every case, we've seen overextension create cascading debt, where you're transferring that debt from one credit card to the next, getting further and further behind. And we see that with schedule delays, we see that with crunch, we see that with any kind of pressure, just building and getting worse and worse each release. And that is what we mean by that road leading on a service to always crunching. And the only way that we've been able to combat that is with rigor. It's with dismantling the whole idea of heroics. That that leave it all on the field final push to close a project that we've all felt in the past. And we have to kind of get rid of that mindset and instead just be disciplined, be constrained, operate in a way that you know can be repeated sustainably and consistently every release. That is the train station mindset. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we've perfected this. I'm talking about the mindset here. The recognition that if you allow even a little bit of overextension to creep onto your teams or onto your project, it's going to cascade and it's going to build release after release. We've seen it happen over and over. And so the reality on the team is that this is a constantly ongoing battle. We don't catch every case on every team, but with every new release, we are trying to constantly, proactively identify where our teams are overextending themselves. Whether this could be through their own passion, or it could be through feature overscoping. But regardless, we try to actively help each team member to learn this lesson so that they can ultimately get onto that never crunching path, because you don't want to be on the other path. And so here's the last almost painful realization for us about train stations. So remember back when I said that box products are in the business of over-delivery. Over-delivery is actually dangerous for a train station. With every release that you put out there, you're setting a pattern for your community and for your players. And so if we release an expansion with 2 raids, let's say, next year, our community is going to be upset if we go back to only 1 raid. We've hurt the station by making a rogue decision on just one of the trains to over-deliver. But at the same time, and this is why this lesson is painful to us, is because so much of quality and delight in our craft comes from over-delivery, right? It comes from giving folks stuff above and beyond what they expected. And we still want to do that. We still want to surprise and delight and sometimes even overwhelm our players. But we need to be mindful of the patterns that we're creating, the implied future commitments that we've set for ourselves each time. And this is tough. This is honestly one of the ones that we're still grappling the hardest with. Because it's hard to tell a team that has extra cycles and they have energy and they want to do something amazing and they know how to do it. And it totally would be amazing and awesome for the game. Sometimes we have to tell them, we shouldn't ship this because it's an over-delivery that is going to set us up for failure on future trains. And to paint it in a more positive, more proactive light, the lesson that we're still learning is that everything we deliver needs to be a blueprint. We need to understand how the blueprint will be repeated and whether or not we can do that repeating sustainably. And if we can't repeat the blueprint, or if we don't want to, we need to make sure that our delivery of that feature or that content sets up player expectations to match ours, that the blueprint is not going to be repeated. So like a good example of this recently was our legendary difficulty for our campaign. That was a cornerstone feature of the Witch Queen, and it's been really well received. Like, I think it really made that expansion better than our previous ones. And it also was a meaningful step up in the amount of work that we had to do building a campaign, because we had 2 difficulty modes that were finely balanced for every single mission. And we knew that going in, so we designed it as a blueprint. And we weren't just worried about whether we could ship the Witch Queen, we were worried about, can we ship this blueprint and repeat it in every future expansion? Which fortunately now, like, we want to, because it's a proven success. So yeah, returning all the way back to this moment in 2018. At the time, it honestly felt like it could be the end for us, like for D2 altogether. But what it really was the inflection point that was the beginning of us really understanding and embracing a live service mindset. This was the inciting incident that led us to some big multi-year shifts in our mindset. This is what helped us solidify a bunch of these learnings that I've tried to walk through with y'all, like how your velocity is so much more important than your current position. That to achieve that velocity, we have to get really comfortable with failing out in the open, in front of our players. That when you're in a live service crisis, prioritizing trust, then retention, then revenue, could help you get out of it. And that you need all of your designs and all of your creative decisions to be data-informed in nuanced and quantifiable ways. And that we're building a train station, not a train, which means that you need to stamp out crunch and any other form of heroics that you're doing that overextends your team. And to beware of over-delivery that can cause future problems for your station. And ultimately, all of these mindset shifts, what they really boil down to is redefining what success means, what quality means for your entire team and culture. And if you do that, I think that any organization can make the transition from a storied history of great AAA box products into the future of live service. So yeah, I hope that you've gotten some value out of the lessons that we had to learn in this space, because we paid for every one of these lessons with a lot of scrapes, a lot of bruises, a lot of blood, and a lot of soul searching. And so I'm hoping that by sharing, you can get to that same destination with far fewer injuries. And if you like what you heard, like, we'd love to have you on this learning journey with us, building the future of live services at Bungie. So we're hiring right now for almost every type of role imaginable. We have development, publishing, from entry level to director level, and we would love to speak with you. So yeah, thank you, everybody. I think we've got about 5 minutes for Q&A. If anyone has questions.
Thanks for the talk. That was really revealing. Appreciate it. I appreciate any candor that you can offer for this specific question. From the beginning, having a specific corporate partner, to becoming fully independent and moving into having another big partner, how did these learnings all collide with that in terms of what buy-in you had originally, maybe, and then from there, what changed in terms of this train station metaphor as you became more independent, and how that relates to moving into a brand new partnership? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the manifestations of these learnings are not, they're not at the green light phase, they're not at the milestone phase, they're in the day-to-day decisions that everyone on your team is making culturally. And so So we found that like if we can make that transition internally in our organization, then we feel really confident that we can make something great, and we can convince anyone that it's going to be amazing, whether that's our players or our partners or our parents. What's up, man?
Yeah, it's a great talk. I'm a little curious about your overall sense in the shift of the industry towards live ops. I feel like a lot of games are slowly becoming the live ops kind of model of things. And until you get to a live ops, you just kind of keep going for it until you get there. So I'm just curious, right? You're well known for a lot of different games and expansions and sequels, but now we're in a live ops mode. Do you see that as like a future for the next decade or so?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're trying to make a game that builds a community that sticks around, then I think it's worth thinking of it as a live service. Like no matter what type of game you're making. You could be making a roguelike, like 8-bit indie game, but if you're planning to release that indie access, like early access, and iterate and build a community, I think you can still think of that as a live service. It's got the same lessons about your velocity mattering, about needing to be in a constant dialogue with your players and being willing to fail publicly to learn faster. Like I think all of those still apply if what you're trying to do is build and nurture a community over time.
Maybe just as a quick follow-up, based on your KPI, do you have a point where like live ops, this is where we would start to ramp down? Have you thought about that far in the future?
Not anytime soon. We are very happy with where Destiny is, and it is getting bigger each year. So
Cool, thank you.
yeah. So man.
Yeah, thanks, Justin, for the talk. Really inspiring. I have a question about the leadership and disciplinary directors and this new approach of the train station. How you convince them in the company that it is a good way, and how you recognize that they change their mindset?
Sorry, can you help me understand the question a little better? What do you mean?
Yeah, because for sure they have all the leads, the directors, they had their previous box mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the conversion, the road to the new one.
Yeah, so like, let me give you an example. We've found that there are things in the game that we could release that might very briefly create some negative sentiment, but then that quickly rebounds as players, like, because sometimes players just don't like change, and then they understand the difference, but they might be really great for the overall health of the game. It causes people to show up more, to play more, to ultimately long-term be happy. And we need to provide all of that data to our team, because if you don't provide all that data, they're gonna see the sentiment side. Like anyone can go on the internet and can see what your players are saying. But if you don't know what like the silent majority are thinking, if you don't know what's happening with engagement, you're probably making the wrong decisions. And so we try to make all of our leaders like see that full picture of what success is so that they can balance those different axes.
Okay, maybe the second one, because you said about the stamina and the creativity, so everybody are boosted with those.
Yep.
How do you have a control that they are all work in the same direction, the same goals, release by release, train by train?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard because, I mean, whatever, it's hard on any creative project to get everybody working the same direction. It gets easier the more similar your blueprint is to something you've done before. Like there's a lot of things that we release in our seasons that we know, even though we're gonna be creative on them, we know the rough size of the box and the shape and what it's supposed to look like. And so we tend to focus when we build our creative pitches on the differences. Like what are the ways in which we're gonna innovate and be different from our previous blueprints, and then really focus our efforts on like aligning the team around those differences.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, we're at the time, so I'll be really quick. I'm a long-time Destiny player and I love it, so thanks again for an amazing game. My question was really about some of those like data-driven insights about the player community itself. Could you share any examples of the things that you said were surprising that you've learned? Maybe from the 30th anniversary pack, which was like way out there, very different kind of experience.
Well, here's what I'll give you. It's not I'm not gonna give you numbers, but the number of players who played the Legendary campaign was shockingly higher than we expected. And even completed it. Like we expected it to be a narrow minority of players who would play it, but it was, yeah, it had a very different uptake in our community than what we expected.
That's great. So
Yeah.
No wonder. Thanks.
Oh, I think let's do one more question and then we're done.
Hey, thank you for the great talk. Love Destiny.
Thank you.
So when you're focusing on DAU and weekly AU,
Yep.
do you break down your audience kind of like by motivation? It's okay for this part of the audience to just like, they care about the story. They're going to show up for a very short time per week to play through this story. Because how do you avoid the trap of focusing so much on that you might burn out your players because they feel like they always need to be engaged. They can't play anything else.
Yeah, and that's kind of that distinction between engagement and sentiment, and why we have to track them both. Because you can create toxic patterns where you motivate people to log in, but they get less and less happy about it. And so when that happens, we see that show up in sentiment first, and then inevitably it's going to show up in your engagement too. Because eventually someone's going to be like, "I'm in an unhealthy relationship. I need to stop this." But we usually catch that first on the sentiment side.
Okay, even if. And there's no way to track it if they're being silent about it, if they just silently.
Well, the sentiment on the silent side with like Rate Last Week, we're able to track even the players who aren't complaining. We can see their interest waning over time.
Okay,
yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, so thank you, everybody.